Once there were trees full of birds, meadowlands vibrant with flowers, carefree the songs our children once sang, gilding our minutes and hours. Clouds came and covered the sun, the breath of a baleful unease, turning to ashes flowers in their fields, silenced the birds in their trees. Hidden so deep in veils of deceit, imprisoned in twisting spells, are we the plaything of fiends, or merely the dreams that we're telling ourselves, telling ourselves? Strive till the phantoms are broken. Fight till the battle is done. The squadrons of night can't conquer the day, nor shadows extinguish the sun. Stories of danger, fearless attack, specters of plague and pain, all of these ghosts of our own delusions come back, and we'll be haunted again, haunted again. For though the storms are rovering past, though the thunders rage, is quiet and at last, while these nightmares late meet down in the wrecks here tonight, here tonight. The night has left us crippled with grief as we strive to keep alive our belief, but a loss so great it clouds all our hopes for the dawn. Hidden so deep in veils of deceit, imprisoned in twisting spells, are we the plaything of fiends, or merely the dreams that we're telling ourselves, telling ourselves?
The water, Wawak Kadash. The water, Kai. Thank you, Holy Spirit. All praises to Ahaya Kesed. That's all praises to Anokised. That's all praises to the great I Am loving kindness. Bahashim Yeshaya. Bahashim Matzah the Lamb. In the name of the Messiah, the Hamashiach. Shalom, family. This is little son Sabal, Nabaya. Family, let's go ahead and jump right in. Let's go to Isaiah chapter 28 and let's read verses 9 and 10. That's Isaiah chapter 28 verses 9 and 10. Whom shall he teach knowledge, and whom shall he make to understand doctrine? Them that are weaned from the milk and drawn from the breast. For precept must be upon precept, precept upon precept, line upon line, line upon line, here a little and there a little. So family, we understand that we get our understanding via the Holy Spirit, via the precepts. Now let's go to Psalm 119 and let's read verses 1 through 3. That's Psalm 119 verses 1 through 3. It says, Blessed are the undefiled in the way, who walk in the law of the Lord. Blessed are they that keep his testimonies, and that seek him with the whole heart. They also do no iniquity. They walk in his ways. Now read verse 4. Thou hast commanded us to keep thy precepts diligently. So family, we just read where it said that we have to seek him with our whole heart. And when you look at that word heart in the Strong's Concordance, it is in the Hebrew number 3824. It says the heart, also used very widely for the feelings, for the will. Are you understanding me? We have spoken before about how the original language had to deal with feelings because it wasn't yet a language. The word language denotes that you are using your tongue. That's what linguistics is all about. It has to do with your tongue. But we're not speaking lingual communication. We're speaking about straight communication. We're talking about feelings. So the first mode of communication was actually feelings. So when we tell you that there are precepts in life, I'm letting you know, hoping that you will understand that what we read in the scriptures is only a part of it. You have to be able to walk in the world and understand that the Father is communicating with you. That thing that just happened with that dog, that was communication with you. That was a language. That thing that happened with the tree, that was a communication with you. That was a language. We understand in terms of language, but it really wasn't a language if it wasn't a tongue being used. But it was communication. And that's what I'm trying to get you to see if you haven't seen it already. This is the very reason why you always hear me say when we read these verses that there are precepts in life. This is why the scripture tells us to meditate. Understand that you have to go out and you have to listen to creation because the Father has messages to you in creation. He is speaking to you through creation. As a matter of fact, stay in Psalm 119 and drop down to verse 15. That's Psalm 119 verse 15. It says, I will meditate in thy precepts, and have respect unto thy ways. You see, he understands that he has to go and listen for the Father. Drop down to verse 27, Psalm 119, verse 27. It says, make me to understand the way of thy precepts, so shall I talk of thy wondrous works. What is his wondrous works? We've spoken about this before. His wondrous works are what he did in creation. Do you see why he's connecting those dots? Make me to understand the way of thy precepts. Make me to understand the way that you have hidden all throughout creation. Help me to understand the precepts that are in life so that I can speak about these things. Now drop down to verse 40. Psalm 119, verse 40. It says, behold, I have longed after thy precepts. Quicken me in thy righteousness. Are you hearing me? You see, you have to have the right relationships with the Spirit in element. Are you hearing me? That's what righteousness is. It's having the right relationships with everything around you. So there is a relationship that you're supposed to have with the grass. And there's a relationship you are supposed to have with somebody that's doing you physical harm. It's called get away from that person. Understand that relationship doesn't mean that you have to be all up and dealing with everything. Sometimes the right relationship is walking away. Sometimes the right relationship is saying, no, I'm not dealing with that. And understand also that sometimes the right relationship for you might not be the right relationship for someone else. So we all have to be righteous the way the Father is leading us to be righteous. That leads me into the topic for this lesson. Because, family, I don't know if you're paying attention to what is going on around you, what is going on out there in the world right now. But if you take a look, then you will notice that there is hysteria and pandemonium all over the globe right now. And no, I'm not here to fight about whether the earth is flat or round. If you don't like the terminology of me saying all over the globe, then here, I'll say it this way for you. All over the world right now. Is that better? All right. Anyway, the point I am making is everywhere you look, it's going down. You've got food plants all around the world shutting down. Don't believe me? Google it. Look how many fires have started happening to all of the different food processing plants, food storage warehouses, chicken plants, all kinds of places that have to do with getting you food. They said that one place that went up in flames actually accounted for 6% of the food in the United States. So I'm not going to go into detail about that right now, but I want you to look around you and see what's happening. You got the food getting scarcer and scarcer, and then you have gas prices skyrocketing. So what you have to do is you have to be ready for what is coming. Now, there are many areas in which we have to be prepared, but today I want to focus on one particular area. Now, this is an area that some of us have already started gearing more toward, but to others it may be completely foreign. And it is those people that I am worried about, because I fear that you may be dependent upon the system that is set in place right now in this regard. And what I'm speaking of is healthcare. Do you have a doctor that you go to? Everyone kind of handles this thing differently. Now, over the years, we've exposed a lot of things about the current healthcare system. But a lot of people, when they get sick, they still run down to urgent care. They still go to their family doctor. They're still dependent on that system. They still got to go and they got to run to the pharmacy and they got to pick up their prescriptions and whatnot. And I get it. Some people have pre-existing conditions that they're dealing with. But here's the truth of the situation. There will come a time where you have to make a choice. And that choice is going to have to make you decide between whether or not you want to go to the right and be without that support, be without those prescriptions that the doctor has told you is the only reason that you're alive. Or you can go to the left and you can continue to get these things. And to be quite honest with you, that's a pretty strong hypothetical, because I feel like there is going to be a shutdown of sorts where no matter who you are, you're going to be cut off from the system at least for a time. But I won't go into all of that right now. What I'm trying to get you to understand is you have more options than you realize. So today, I want to show you a little history about how healthcare was really controlled. I want to highlight a little bit about who it was controlled by and about what has happened over the years. So before we go into what has happened in recent times, let's go to the scriptures. Let's go to the book of Exodus, chapter 1. And let's read verses 6 through 17. That's Exodus chapter 1, verses 6 through 17. It says, "And Joseph died, and all his brethren, and all that generation. And the children of Israel were fruitful, and increased abundantly, and multiplied, and waxed exceeding mighty. And the land was filled with them. And there arose up a new king over Egypt, which knew not Joseph. And he said unto his people, Behold, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come on, let us deal wisely with them, lest they multiply, and it come to pass, that when there falleth out any war, they join also unto our enemies, and fight against us, and so get them up out of the land. Therefore they did set over them taskmasters, to afflict them with their burdens. And they built for Pharaoh treasure cities, Pithom and Ramesses. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew, and they were grieved because of the children of Israel. And the Egyptians made the children of Israel to grieve with rigor, and they made their lives bitter and hard bondage in mortar, Slakia, and they made their lives bitter with hard bondage in mortar and in brick, and in all manner of service in the field. All their service wherein they made them serve was with rigor. And the king of Egypt spake to the Hebrew midwives, of which the name of the one was Shiphrah, and the name of the other Puah. And he said, When do ye the office of a midwife to the Hebrew, and see them upon the stools? If it be a son, then ye shall kill him. But if it be a daughter, then she shall live. But the midwives feared God, and did not as the king of Egypt commanded them, but saved the men children alive. So here we are looking back in history, and we are seeing where the Pharaoh went to the midwives in order to try and control the people. But it says that the midwives feared God. You see, they understood something. As a matter of fact, let's go to Exodus chapter 15 and let's read verse 26. That's the book of Exodus chapter 15, verse 26. It says, "And said, If thou wilt diligently hearken to the voice of the Lord thy God, and wilt do that which is right in his sight, and wilt give ear to his commandments, and keep his statutes, I will put none of these diseases upon thee, which I have brought upon the Egyptians, for I am the Lord that healeth thee." You see, these midwives understood who their healer was. As a matter of fact, when it comes to healing, we all know who the healer is. Everything that is done to heal you, true healing, not patching, not what you call it, not medicating, but true healing comes from the Most High. Understand, this goes right back to having the right relationship with everything. Because if there's a plant in your backyard and you chew it and eat it, and it heals you and makes you better, then you understand that the right relationship with that plant is to eat it when a certain thing is ailing you. This all goes back to righteousness. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand that righteousness goes hand in hand with healing. And it's wild. It's wild that they went to the midwives. Let me show y'all something. Let's go in the Book of Mormon to 2nd Nephi chapter 3. And let's read verses 4 through 12. 2nd Nephi chapter 3, verses 4 through 12. It says, "For behold, thou art the fruit of my loins, and I am a descendant of Joseph, who was carried captive into Egypt. And great were the covenants of the covenants of the Lord which he made unto Joseph. Wherefore Joseph truly saw our day, and he obtained a promise of the Lord, that out of the fruit of his loins the Lord God would raise up a righteous branch unto the house of Israel, not the Messiah, but a branch which was to be broken off, nevertheless to be remembered in the covenants of the Lord, that the Messiah should be made manifest unto them in the latter days, in the spirit of power, unto the bringing them out of darkness unto the light, yea, out of hidden darkness and out of captivity unto freedom. For Joseph truly testified, saying, A seer shall the Lord my God raise up, who shall be a choice seer unto the fruit of my loins. Yea, Joseph truly said, Thus saith the Lord unto me, A choice seer will I raise up out of the fruit of thy loins, and he shall be esteemed highly among the fruit of thy loins. And unto him will I give commandment that he shall do a work for the fruit of thy loins. His brethren, which shall be of great worth unto them, even to the bringing of them to the knowledge of the covenants which I have made with thy fathers. And I will give unto him a commandment, that he shall do none other work, save the work which I shall command him. And I will make him great in mine eyes, for he shall do my work. And he shall be great like unto Moses, whom I have said I would raise up unto you to deliver my people, O house of Israel. And Moses will I raise up to deliver thy people out of the land of Egypt. But a seer will I raise up out of the fruit of thy loins, and unto him will I give power to bring forth my word unto the seed of thy loins, and not to the bringing forth of my word only, saith the Lord, but to the convincing them of my word, which shall have already gone forth among them. Wherefore, the fruit of thy loins shall write, and the fruit of the loins of Judah shall write, and that which shall be written by the fruit of thy loins, and also that which shall be written by the fruit of the loins of Judah, shall grow together unto the confounding of false doctrines, and laying down of contentions, and establishing peace among the fruit of thy loins, and bringing them to the knowledge of their fathers in the latter days, and also to the knowledge of my covenants, saith the Lord. Ladies and gentlemen, did y'all just read that? Let me tell you. Let's look at verse 11 again. It says, but a seer will I raise up out of the fruit of thy loins, and unto him will I give power to bring forth my word unto the seed of thy loins, and not to the bringing forth my word only, saith the Lord, but to the convincing them of my word, which shall already have gone forth among them. Now, family, y'all know we can take just what we read just now, and we can do a whole lesson just on this little bit. But we're not going to go there. Let's just talk about what we just read. As a matter of fact, does anybody see how this is correlating to the midwives? Well, maybe the midwives who are listening, they might see it already. Let's go to another verse and see if you catch it. Let's go to 2 Nephi chapter 29. 2 Nephi chapter 29, and let's read verses 1 through 4. 2 Nephi chapter 29, verses 1 through 4. It says, but behold, there shall be many at that day, when I shall proceed to do a marvelous work among them, that I may remember my covenants, which I have made unto the children of men, that I may set my hand again the second time to recover my people, which are of the house of Israel. And also that I may remember the promises which I have made unto thee, Nephi, and also unto thy father, that I would remember your seed, and that the words of your seed shall proceed forth out of the mouth unto your seed, and my words shall hiss forth unto the ends of the earth, for a standard unto my people, which are of the house of Israel. And because my words shall hiss forth, many of the Gentiles shall say, a Bible, we have got a Bible, and there cannot be any more Bible. But thus saith the Lord God, O fools, they shall have a Bible, and it shall proceed forth from the Jews, mine ancient covenant people. And what thank they the Jews for the Bible, which they received from them? Yea, what do Gentiles mean? Do they remember the travails and the labors and the pains of the Jews, and their diligence unto me in bringing forth salvation unto the Gentiles? Family, are y'all seeing the correlation now? Are you seeing what it says when it says the bringing forth of salvation unto the Gentiles? Do you understand how this is correlating to the midwives? Well, if you don't get it, let's spell it out for you. When you look at the word midwives in the Strong's Concordance, what you are looking at in the Strong's is number 3205. It is Yalad. And what it means, as a matter of fact, if you go to Jeff Benner's The Torah, a mechanical translation, where this is a wonderful book, y'all. If y'all don't have it, get it. Get this book. You need it. You want it. It's wonderful. Anyway, when you go to this book and you go to this word, yalad, it breaks down, it means to issue out, to bring forth children, either by women who bears them or man who fathers. You see, ladies and gentlemen, it's about bringing forth. That's what we just read in the Book of Mormon. You see, we just read about the bringing forth of the word to the seed of his loins. You see, family, when you are dealing with travail, and you're dealing with a womb, and you're dealing with getting something out of that, you got to bring it forth out of that. Understand that the womb, that's something you need to have compassion on. It takes great compassion. Know ye not that the belly is the seat of compassion? Hey, when you read about Leviathan, in the book of Job, it tells you that his strength is in his bowels. Understand what it's really saying right there. And that's a future lesson. We'll talk about that later. We're going to go more into and you know what? That wasn't even Leviathan. It's Behemoth. It's Behemoth I'm thinking about. But when you go into Behemoth, it tells you about his strength being in his bowels. So it's speaking of compassion. Understand that compassion is needed for this work. You can't be a midwife bringing forth babies and not have compassion. It won't work. Are we not called to bring forth fruit, meet for repentance? So going after someone who is a midwife, going after someone who is a healer, a true midwife, a true healer, they're dealing with holy things. They're dealing with the Father. You understand? They're dealing with the Messiah. They're dealing with righteousness, because their very job means that they have to understand the right relationship with all the things that surround a baby, the womb, where the baby has to pass through. There's all these factors that can affect the birth of a baby. And this is something that we all go through individually in our spiritual lives. What was it that brought forth the light unto you? How did you come into this? And then after that, how did you proceed in bringing forth fruit? Again, that's a whole nother lesson, but we're not going there right now. I just want to put that on your mind just for a second. What I am going to do now is read to you from a pamphlet, that was first published in 1973. The name of this article is Witches, Midwives, and Nurses. Now, I'm not going to read you the entire pamphlet because it is quite lengthy, but I am going to read to you a good bit of it, so you will be able to get the gist of this pamphlet. Now, before I start to read this, I want you to know that even though the information in it is good, it was presented by a feminist, so it is largely directed towards that. It's directed towards towards defending of women and empowerment and all of that kind of stuff. But that's not why we're reading this. We are reading this because of the factual information that is in this pamphlet. And as I am reading it, I may interject and say a few comments. Okay, so here's what it says. It says, women have always been healers. They were the unlicensed doctors and anatomists of Western history. They were abortionists, nurses, and counselors. They were pharmacists, cultivating healing herbs and exchanging the secrets of their uses. They were midwives traveling from home to home and village to village. For centuries, women were doctors without degrees, barred from books and lectures, learning from each other and passing on experience from neighbor to neighbor and mother to daughter. They were called wise women by the people, witches or charlatans by the authorities. Medicine is part of our heritage as women, our history, our birthright. Now again, remember what I said, we are going to dodge the hijack. Like I said, this is highly being geared towards women. You see, they put some stuff in there about abortionists. You know, we ain't fooling with no abortion either, but we know that a lot of feminists feel like it's their right to be able to abort a child. But we know it's murder. Continuing on, it says, our position in the health system today is not natural. It is a condition which has to be explained. In this pamphlet, we have asked, how did we arrive at our present position of subservience from our former position of leadership? We have learned this much, that the suppression of women health workers and the rise to dominance of male professionals was not a natural process, resulting automatically from changes in medical science, nor was it the result of women's failure to take on healing work. It was an active takeover by male professionals, and it was not science that enabled men to win out. The critical battles took place long before the development of modern scientific technology. The stakes of the struggle were high. Political and economic monopolization of medicine meant control over its institutional organizations, its theory and practice, its profits and prestige. Stakes are even higher today when total control of medicine means potential power to determine who will live and who will die, who is fertile and who is sterile, who is mad and who is sane. Now, let me tell you something that is definitely covered in this pamphlet. It's covered in the pamphlet, but I'm not sure how aware of it that the author was. And that is that this movement where she is thinking that it's targeting against women, it was more than just about women. It was about the control and power that comes from trying to control healing. Understand, this is the same reason that Pharaoh went to the midwives, because when you control the healers, you control the people. All right. Picking back up, it says the other side of the suppression of witches as healers was the creation of new male medical profession under the protection and patronage of the ruling classes. The new European medical profession played an important role in the witch hunts, supporting the witches' prosecutors with medical reasoning. And then it has an excerpt right here from a book by Thomas Zass called The Manufacture of Madness. It says, because the medieval church, with the support of kings, princes, and secular authorities, controlled medical education and practice, the Inquisition, and then in parentheses, witch hunts, constitutes, among other things, an early instance of the professional, repudiating the skills and interfering with the rights of the non-professional to minister to the poor. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to point out that where this talks about the suppression of witches as healers, understand it's talking about women who were not actual witches, but who were being called witches because they were healing. In other words, if you weren't doing anything under the sanctioning of the church or the state, and I don't mean the true church, I mean the wicked, evil Roman Catholic Church. But if you weren't doing things by the way they told you to do it, then you could be labeled as a witch and destroyed. Anyway, let's keep reading. It says, the age of witch hunting spanned more than 4 centuries, from the 14th to the 17th century. In its sweep from Germany to England, it was born in feudalism and lasted, gaining in virulence. There we go. Virulence. Maybe that's how I pronounce it. Anyway, gaining in virulence well into the age of reason. The witch craze took different forms at different times and places, but never lost its essential character, that of a ruling class. A ruling class campaign of terror directed against the female peasant population. Witches represented a political, religious, and sexual threat to the Protestant and Catholic churches alike, as well as to the state. I'm going to stop here just to interject that this was not specifically directed at the female peasant population, but this was directed at peasants in general. Now, it is true, a lot of women got it a lot worse because they were women. But I want you to understand that this wasn't limited to women. Let's keep going. The extent of the witch craze is startling. In the late 15th and early 16th centuries, there were thousands upon thousands of executions, usually live burnings at the stake, in Germany, Italy, and other countries. In the mid-16th century, the terror spread to France and finally to England. One writer has estimated the number of executions at an average of 600 a year for certain German cities, or 2 a day, leaving out Sundays. 900 witches were destroyed in a single year in the Westburg area, and 1,000 in and around Como. At Toulouse, 400 were put to death a day. In Bishopric of Trier in 1585, 2 villages were left with only 1 female inhabitant each. Many writers have estimated the total number killed to have been in the millions. Women made up some 85% of those executed. Old women, young women, and children. Wow, let's keep reading. 2 of the most common theories on the witch hunts are basically medical interpretations, attributing the witch craze to unexplainable outbreaks of mass hysteria. One version has it that the peasantry went mad. According to this, the witch craze was an epidemic of mass hatred and panic, cast in images of bloody, lusty peasant mob bearing flaming torches. Another psychiatric interpretation holds that the witches themselves were insane. One authoritative psychiatric historian, Gregory Zilborg, wrote that millions of witches, sorcerers, possessed and obsessed were an enormous mass of severe neurotics and psychotics. For many years, the world looked like a veritable insane asylum. But in fact, the witch craze was neither a lynching party nor a mass suicide by hysterical women. Rather, it followed well-ordered, legalistic procedures. The witch hunts were well-organized campaigns, initiated, financed, and executed by church and state to Catholic and Protestant witch hunters alike. The unquestioned authority on how to conduct a witch hunt was the Malleus Maleficarum, or the Hammer of Witches, written in 1484 by the Reverends Kramer and Springer, the beloved sons of Pope Innocent VIII. For 3 centuries, this sadistic book lay on the bench of every judge, every witch hunter. In a long section of judicial proceedings, the instructions make it clear how the hysteria was set off. The job of initiating a witch trial was to be performed by either the vicar, who was a priest, or judge of the county, who was to post a notice to direct, command, require, and admonish that within the space of 12 days they should reveal it unto us if anyone know, see, or have heard that any person is reported to be a heretic or a witch, or if any is suspected, especially of such practices as cause injury to men, cattle, or the fruits of the earth, to the loss of state. Anyone failing to report a witch faced both excommunication and a long list of temporal punishments. If this threatening notice exposed at least one witch, her trial could be used to unearth several more. Kramer and Springer gave detailed instructions about the use of tortures to force confessions and further accusations. Commonly, the accused was stripped naked and shaved of all her body hair, then subjected to thumb screws and the rack, spikes and bone-crushing boots, starvation and beatings. The point is obvious. The witch craze did not arise spontaneously in peasantry. It was a calculated ruling class campaign of terrorization. So y'all see that. This was a move that was a coordination of the government and that wicked church to come against the low people. Let's keep reading. Who were the witches then, and what were their crimes that could arouse such vicious upper-class suppression? Undoubtedly, over the centuries of witch hunting, the charge of witchcraft came to cover a multitude of sins, ranging from political subversion to religious heresy to lewdness and blasphemy. But 3 central accusations emerged repeatedly in the history of witchcraft throughout Northern Europe. First, witches are accused of every conceivable sexual crime against men. Quite simply, they are accused of female sexuality. Second, they are accused of being organized. Third, they are accused of having magical powers affecting health, of harming, but also of healing. They were often charged specifically with possessing medical and obstetrical skills. So, in other words, ladies and gentlemen, if people were healing, then that was suspicion of being a witch. This included, but was not limited to, what do you call those doctors that deal with the women's lady parts? Y'all know what y'all call them. Them kind of doctors. Wow. Look at that. Anyway, just to show you what kind of madness was going on, and I thought about whether I wanted to leave this part in here or not, I decided to go ahead and read it to you. Check this out. It says, first consider the charge of sexual crimes. The medieval Catholic Church elevated sexism to a point of principle. The Malleus declares, when a woman thinks alone, she thinks evil. The misogyny of the church, if not proved by the witchcraft itself, is demonstrated by its teaching that in intercourse, the male deposits in the female a homunculus, or little person, complete with a soul, which is simply housed in the womb for 9 months. Without acquiring any attributes of the mother, the homunculus is not really safe. However, until it reaches male hands again, when a priest baptizes it, ensuring the salvation of its immortal soul. So, ladies and gentlemen, just from reading this, we know what the real witchcraft was, because we know what the scripture says about the wickedness of baptizing babies. But see how they flip the script? They want to take the healers and make the healers be the witches, when here they are actively engaging in witchcraft and sorcery. All right. Now, moving right along, it says, we come now to the most fantastic accusation of all. The witch, not only accused of murdering and poisoning, sex crimes and conspiracy, but of helping and healing. As a leading English witch hunter put it, for this must always be remembered, as a conclusion, that by witches we understand not only those which kill and torment, but all diviners, charmers, jugglers, all wizards, commonly called wise men and wise women, are in the same number. We reckon all good witches, which do not hurt but good, which do not spoil and destroy, but save and deliver. It were 1,000 times better for the land if all witches, but especially the blessing witch, might suffer death. So you see the problem. They are lumping in the healer with the diviner, the charmer, the juggler, and the wizard. This is the wickedness of the people at that time. And let me tell you something. We're not far from it right now. Let's keep going. Witch healers were often the only general medical practitioners for people who had no doctors and no hospitals, and who were bitterly afflicted with poverty and disease. In particular, the association of the witch and the midwife was strong. No one does more harm to the Catholic Church than midwives, wrote witch hunters Kramer and Springer. The church itself had little to offer the suffering peasantry. On Sundays after Mass, the sick came in scores, crying for help, and words were all they got. You have sinned, and God is afflicting you. Thank Him. You will suffer so much less torment in the life to come. Endure, suffer, die. Has not the church its prayers for the dead? That was Jules Michelet of Satanism and witchcraft. Understand how wicked this church was. You see, when you look in the scriptures, you see Messiah was healing all the time. Healing, 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 healing. But look at the words these people got. You have sinned, and the Father's afflicting you. Thank Him so you'll suffer less. Ain't that something? Let's continue. Actually, before we continue, I want to point out where we just read that it says that these healers, they call them witch healers in the paper, but I don't like doing that because they weren't witches. But anyway, these healers were often the only general medical practitioners for people who had no doctors and no hospitals. Wow. Ladies and gentlemen, this is going to happen again. When they pull the rug out of the system, and you have to truly decide when it's time to be reintroduced back into a wicked system, whether you are going to play ball with them and their wickedness, or are you going to go to the righteous sister who says, hey brother, I got some herbs for you. Understand that when you're in the right relationships with the spirits and element, you know what good a dandelion can do for you. You know what good a stinging nettle can do for you. You know what good the mullein can do for you. Understand that all around us, the Father is saying, have the right relationships with the spirits and element. This is real righteousness. Let's continue. When faced with the misery of the poor, the church turned to the dogma that experience in this world is fleeting and unimportant. But there was a double standard at work, for the church was not against medical care for the upper class. Kings and nobles had their court physicians who were men, sometimes even priests. The real issue was control. Male upper-class healing under the auspices of the church was acceptable. Female healing as part of the peasant subculture was not. Now, once again, the author of this piece is trying to play it men against women, but even in her words, she's letting you know the real issue was control. This was about the upper class and the peasant subculture. They wanted you to only heal in their ways. It just so happens that they also were not accepting of women at that time to be in that upper culture. But if you were a man trying to be in that subculture, they didn't want you operating that way either. Let's continue. The church saw its attack on peasant healers as an attack on magic, not medicine. The devil was believed to have real power on earth, and the use of that power by peasant women, whether for good or evil, was frightening to the church and state. But you see, they don't understand that you can't use good for evil. Good is going to be good. Fact. Let's continue. The greater their satanic power to help themselves, the less they were dependent on God and the church, and the more they were potentially able to use their powers against God's order. Now, what you can do, I'm going to stop again, just to clarify my words just now. What you can do is use something intended for good the wrong way. Thus, again, now you're doing evil. Anyway, let's continue. Magic charms were thought to be at least as effective as prayer in healing the sick, but prayer was church sanctioned and controlled, while incantations and charms were not. Thus, magic cures, even when successful, were an accursed interference with the will of God, achieved with the help of the devil, and the cure itself was evil. There was no problem in distinguishing God's curses from the devil's, for obviously the Lord would work through priests and doctors rather than peasant women. Oh, these people are funny. The wise woman, or witch, had a host of remedies which had been tested in years of use. Many of the herbal remedies developed by witches still have their place in modern pharmacology. They had painkillers, digestive aids, and anti-inflammatory agents. They used ergo for the pain of labor at the time when the church held that pain of labor was the Lord's just punishment for Eve's original sin. Ergo derivatives are the principal drugs used today to hasten labor and aid in the recovery from childbirth. Belladonna, still used today as an antispasmodic, was used by witch healers to inhibit uterine contractions when miscarriage threatened. Digitalis, still an important drug in treating heart ailments, is said to have been discovered by an English witch. Undoubtedly, many of the witches' other remedies were purely magical and owed their effectiveness, if they had any, to their reputation. So, you got to consider the ignorance of the woman writing this piece. She doesn't understand faith, healing. That's what she's telling you by what she just wrote. Understand that people who are operating the way the Most High would have them to, if their gift is healing, then yes, they're going to know about natural herbs and things, but they're also going to know what the scriptures say about the laying on of hands. Anyway, let's continue. The witch healer's methods were as great a threat to the Catholic Church, if not the Protestant, as her results, for the witch was an empiricist. She relied on her senses rather than on faith or doctrine. She believed in trial and error, cause and effect. Her attitude was not religiously passive, but actively inquiring. She trusted her ability to find ways to deal with disease, pregnancy, and childbirth, whether through medications or charms. In short, her magic was the science of her time. Well, again, what this lady does not understand is that you got to try the spirit. Let's continue. The church, by contrast, was deeply anti-empirical. It discredited the value of the material world and had a profound distrust of the senses. There was no point in looking for natural laws that govern physical phenomena, for the world is created anew by God in every instant. Kramer and Springer in the Malleus quote St. Augustine on the deceptiveness of the senses. Here's the quote. Now, the motive of the will is something perceived through the senses or the intellect, both of which are subject to the power of the devil. For St. Augustine says in Book 83, this evil, which is of the devil, creeps in by all the sensual approaches. He places himself in figures, he adapts himself to colors, he attaches himself to sounds, he lurks in the angry and wrongful conversation, he abides in smells, he impregnates with flavors, and fills with certain exhalations all the channels of the understanding. The senses are the devil's playground, the arena into which he will try to lure men away from the faith and into the conceits of the intellect or delusions of carnality. Okay, now, that particular quote that we just read is actually, in a sense, talking about itself, because the writer has actually played into the delusions of the devil, even in writing what he just wrote. So we could dissect that. We could dissect the truth away from it. But this is the very reason why, like we said earlier, you have to try the spirit. Let's keep going. While witches practiced among the people, the ruling classes were cultivating their own breed of secular healers, the university-trained physicians. Here it is, y'all. This was their plan all along. In the century that preceded the beginning of the witch craze, the 13th century, European medicine became firmly established as a secular science and a profession. The medical profession was actively engaged in the elimination of female healers. Their exclusion from the universities, for example, long before the witch hunts began. So you see that. This was the whole witch hunting thing was a response. It was called, they tried to control the medical field in the universities and tried to put out actual doctors. But here's the problem. Academia was a thing that a lot of males did. And then the females who weren't allowed to go and do all that, they had to do what the Father made them to do. As a matter of fact, what's it say about women in the Handbook of Established Righteousness? Let's go look at it. Let's see. It says that women are the accumulation of all feelings in element. You see that? Understand that there's a reason why women are the way they are, why women feel so much. You know, it's really quite advantageous for a woman to be a healer, because she can go out and she can feel things so easily with the elements in creation. She can find those things that can be a help to you, that you can heal with. So, hey, I'm with it. But you see what's going on here. They were moving more towards the culture that we have right now. You see that? That's why I'm telling y'all, things are going to change again. We're going to have to go back this way. Hey, show of hands or show of comments, just leave a comment under this video if you have been being led back to more holistic, natural healing. Oh, and by the way, the word holistic being used with natural healing, when you look up the word healing in the Strongs, it actually also says to make whole. So you want holistic healing. You want to be made whole. Anyway, show of hands though, if you've been being led towards this type of healing, if you've been being led to study this type of thing, if you are a person who's been being led to be an herbalist or to go forth and learn about how to be a doula or learn how to be a midwife, please leave a comment. Let me know. I'd love to see your comment in the comments. Anyway, let's keep reading. There was nothing in late medieval medical training that conflicted with church doctrine, and little that we would recognize as science. Medical students, like other scholarly young gentlemen, spent years studying Plato, Aristotle, Christian theology. You see that? This is how it was back then. Now watch this. Confronted with a sick person, the university-trained physician had little to go on but superstition. Bleeding was a common practice, especially in the case of wounds. Leeches were applied according to the time, the hour, the air, and other similar conditions. Medical theories were often grounded more in logic than in observation. Some foods brought on good humors and others evil humors. For example, nasturtium, mustard, and garlic produce reddish bile. Lentils, cabbage, and the meat of old goats and beeves begot black bile. Incantations and quasi-religious rituals were thought to be effective. The physician to Edward II, who held a bachelor's degree in theology and a doctorate in medicine from Oxford, prescribed for toothache, writing on the jaws of the patient, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, Amen, or touching a needle to a caterpillar and then to the tooth. A frequent treatment for leprosy was a broth made of the flesh of a black snake caught in a dry land among stones. Such was the state of medical science at the time when witch healers were persecuted for being practitioners of magic. It was witches who developed an extensive understanding of bones and muscles, herbs and drugs, while physicians were still deriving their prognosis from astrology, and alchemists were trying to turn lead into gold. So great was the witches' knowledge that in 1527, Paracelsus, considered the father of modern medicine, burned his text on pharmaceuticals, confessing that he had learned from the sorceresses all he knew. Isn't that something? Let's keep going. The establishment of medicine as a profession requiring university training made it easy to bar women legally from practice. With few exceptions, the universities were closed to women, even to upper-class women who could afford them. And licensing laws were established to prohibit all but university-trained doctors from practice. It was impossible to enforce the licensing laws consistently since there were only a handful of university-trained doctors compared to the great mass of lay healers. But the laws could be used selectively. Their first target was not the peasant healer, but the better-off literate woman healer who competed for the same urban clientele as that of the university-trained doctors. Y'all see that? competed for the same clientele. It's all about money. Let's keep going. Take, for example, the case of Jacoba Felicier, brought to trial in 1322 by Faculty of Medicine of the University of Paris on charges of illegal practice. Jacoba was illiterate and had received some unspecified special training in medicine. That her patients were well off is evident from the fact that as they testified in court, they had consulted well-known university-trained physicians before turning to her. The primary accusations brought against her were that she would cure her patient of internal illness and wounds or external abscesses. She would visit the sick assiduously and continue to examine the urine in the manner of physicians, feel the pulse, and touch the body and limbs. 6 witnesses affirmed that Jacoba had cured them, even after numerous doctors had given up, and one patient declared that she was wiser in the art of surgery and medicine than any master physician or surgeon in Paris. But these testimonials were used against her, for the charge was not that she was incompetent, but that as a woman she dared to cure at all. You see that? Isn't that wild? Along the same lines, English physicians sent a petition to Parliament bewailing the worthlessness and presumptuous women who usurped the profession, and asking the imposition of fines and long imprisonment on any woman who attempted to use the practice of fisc. By the 14th century, the medical profession campaign against urban educated women healers was virtually complete throughout Europe. Male doctors had won a clear monopoly over the practice of medicine among the upper classes, except for obstetrics, which remained the province of female midwives even among the upper classes for another 3 centuries. They were ready to take on the key role in the elimination of the great mass of female healers, the witches. The partnership between church and medical profession reached full bloom in the witch trials. The doctor was held up, the medical expert, giving an aura of science to the whole proceeding. He was asked to make judgments about whether certain women were witches and whether certain afflictions had been caused by witchcraft. The Malleus says, and if it is asked how it is possible to distinguish whether an illness is caused by witchcraft or by some natural physical defect, we answer that the first way is means of judgment of doctors. In the witch hunts, the church explicitly legitimized the doctor's professionalism, denouncing non-professional healing as equivalent to heresy. If a woman dare to cure without having studied, she is a witch and must die. Ooh, look at that. Let's read that again. If a woman dare to cure without having studied, she is a witch and must die. Of course, there wasn't any way for a woman to study. Finally, the witch craze provided a handy excuse for the doctor's failings in everyday practice. Anything he couldn't cure was obviously the result of sorcery. The distinction between female superstition and male medicine was made final by the very roles of the doctor and the witch at the trial. The trial, in one stroke, established the male physician on a moral and intellectual plane vastly above the female healer he was called to judge. It placed him on the side of God and law, a professional on par with lawyers and theologians, while it placed her on the side of darkness, evil, and magic. He owed his new status not to medical or scientific achievements of his own, but to the church and state he served so well. Wow. So are y'all seeing the political positioning of all of this, of how all of this came to pass, how we got to the point where we are now. Anyway, let's continue. Witch hunts did not eliminate the lower class woman healer, but they branded her forever as superstitious and possibly malevolent. Wow, y'all see that? How many people today refuse to go to midwives? How many people today refuse to go to a female herbalist? They might go to her to cure a cough, but they don't really want to go to her for nothing major because that's superstition. They don't trust that. They want to go to somebody that got some letters behind their name. PhD, MD, LD, RD, 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 RD. I don't know. Let's continue. So thoroughly was she discredited among the emerging middle classes that in the 17th and 18th centuries, it was possible for male practitioners to make serious inroads into the last preserves of female healing, midwifery. Non-professional male practitioners, barber surgeons, led the assault in England, claiming technical superiority on the basis of the use of obstetrical forceps. The forceps were legally classified as a surgical instrument, and women were legally barred from surgical practice. In the hands of barber surgeons, obstetrical practice among the middle class was quickly transformed from a neighborly service into a lucrative business, which real physicians entered in force in the 18th century. Female midwives in England organized and charged the male intruders with commercialism and dangerous misuse of the forceps, but it was too late. The women were easily put down as ignorant old wives, clinging to superstitions of the past. Wow. Let's continue. In the U.S., the male takeover of healing roles started later than in England or France, but ultimately went much farther. Is part of the 19th century's long story of class and sex struggles for power in all areas of life. When women had a place in medicine, it was in a people's medicine. When the people's medicine was destroyed, there was no place for women, except the subservient role of nurses. I'd like to remind you all that this is saying women, but what you need to look at is you think about the word peasant. So let's read it that way. When peasants had a place in medicine, it was in a people's medicine. When that people's medicine was destroyed, there was no place for peasants. And I'll read it that way to make you understand that this is talking about healing. This is talking about real healing, healing that comes from the Father. You know, people who are actively healing with what the Father blessed us with. Understand, the herb is for healing. Let's keep going. The set of healers who became the medical profession was distinguished not so much by its associations with the modern science as by its associations with emerging American business establishment. With all due respect to Pastor Koch and other great European medical researchers of the 19th century, it was the Carnegies and Rockefellers who intervened to secure the final victory of the American medical profession. What? But we knew this. Let's keep going. The U.S. in the 1800s could hardly have been a more unpromising environment for the development of a medical profession, or any profession for that matter. Few formally trained physicians had immigrated here from Europe. There were very few schools of medicine in America and very few institutions of higher learning altogether. The general public, fresh from a war with a national liberation, was hostile to professionalism and foreign elitisms of any type. So, ladies and gentlemen, what you're seeing what you're seeing is the way that the European witch trials and things they were having over there, the way that influenced what was happening in America. Let's keep going. In the early 1800s, there was also a growing number of formally trained doctors who took great pains to distinguish themselves from the host of lay practitioners. The most important real distinction was that the formally trained or regular doctors, as they called themselves, were male, usually middle class, and almost always more expensive than the lay competition. The regulars' practices were largely confined to middle and upper class people who could afford the prestige of being treated by a gentleman of their own class. By 1800, fashion even dictated that upper and middle class women employ male regular doctors for obstetrical care, a custom which plainer people regarded as grossly indecent. Plainer people. Talking about the peasantry, talking about the humble people, the poor. All right. There's a lot more here, specifically about America over the next couple of decades. I'm not going into all of that. I'm just letting you know in case you look up this pamphlet and decide to read it yourself. But let's start reading here. It says, in state after state, new tough licensing laws sealed the doctor's monopoly on medical practice. All that was left was to drive out the last holdouts of the old people's medicine, the midwives. In 1910, about 50% of all babies were delivered by midwives. Most were blacks or working-class immigrants. It was an intolerable situation to the newly emerging obstetrical specialty. For one thing, every poor woman who went to a midwife was one more case lost to academic teaching and research. America's vast lower-class resources of obstetrical teaching material were being wasted on ignorant midwives. Besides which, poor women were spending an estimated $5 million a year on midwives. $5 million that could have gone to the professionals. See, it's like I told y'all, it's all about money. Publicly, however, the obstetricians launched their attacks on midwives in the name of science and reform. Midwives were ridiculed as hopelessly dirty, ignorant, and incompetent. Specifically, they were held responsible for the prevalence of puerperal sepsis, uterine infections, and neonatal ophthalmia, blindness due to parental infection with gonorrhea. Both conditions were easily preventable by techniques well within the grasp of the least literate midwife. Hand washing for puerperal sepsis and eye drops for ophthalmia. So the obvious solution for a truly public-spirited obstetrical profession would have been to make the appropriate preventive techniques known and available to the mass of midwives. This is, in fact, what happened in England, Germany, and most other European nations. Midwifery was upgraded through training to become an established, independent occupation. But the American obstetricians had no real commitment to improved obstetrical care. In fact, a study by John Hopkins, professor in 1912, indicated that most American doctors were less competent than the midwives. Not only were the doctors themselves unreliable about preventing sepsis and ophthalmia, but they also tended to be too ready to use surgical techniques which endangered mother or child. If anyone then deserved a legal monopoly on obstetrical care, it was the midwives, not the MDs. But the doctors had power. The midwives didn't. Under intense pressure from the medical profession, state after state passed laws outlawing midwifery and restricting the practice of obstetrics to doctors. For poor and working class women, this actually meant worse or no obstetrical care. For instance, A study of infant mortality rates in Washington showed an increase in infant mortality in the years immediately following the passage of the law forbidding midwifery. For the new male medical profession, the ban on midwives meant one less source of competition. Women have been rooted from their last foothold as independent practitioners. Okay, family, there is more on this pamphlet, but that's as far as I'm going right now. Because I think by this point in this pamphlet, I think you are getting it. I think by now you understand. The current state of health, I don't know what you call it, health care, the entire medical institution right now, the way that it is now, it came about by real persecution. Just like everything else about this wicked government, we know whose blood was spilt. We know whose backs all these buildings were built on. We know whose blood and bones is churning right now inside of the concrete of the highways that we drive on back and forth all across the country. The medical industry is no different. As we pointed out in the scriptures earlier, it is the Father who heals. It is the Father who makes whole. Because of the state of the world right now, because of everything going on, you all can sense it. You all can sense what is coming, but you may not have prepared yourself yet in this way. So I'm here to sound the alarm. You need to start thinking about letting go of the healing from this wicked system. Whatever it is, I'm not attacking anybody. I know that there's people with conditions. Well, you know what? You still gonna have a condition when you don't have access to your local pharmacy. What are you going to do then? What I am trying to tell you is you need to begin to think about, you need to begin to prepare for what is inevitable. It is my suggestion that you should take a righteous approach to healing. The water, Kai, all praises to Anoki said, Bahashem Matzah, the Lamb. This is little son Sabal, saying much love and much shalom.